Good morning. Good morning. How are you? Good. Oh, no, I don't even have a tree up. I don't. First year ever. So my kids, like, hey, you want to know the magic's over? The magic's over. So mommy can't find that magic wand this year. He's now brains all over the place on his stuff. And my two pictures on so that's it. We're not doing no, we're doing first. We're doing the Jesus side. If you want to name the other crap, go in the basement, get the thing marked tree, hang up. I don't know what you want. From one person. And now I'm running to leave me alone. It was a big thank God that so now we're waiting on the pathology report. We have 4 more days left for it to come to find out what the recurrent rate is. Like, and that they can tell what the likelihood is. But they were able to save the kidney, which is evidence. Because he said if they have to put me on dialysis, just go. He's like, I watched my aunt, I really like that. She did. So.
Good evening. I'd like to call our meeting to order and invite you to stand and join me in the pledge to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Could we have the roll call, please?
Yes. Mr. Desai? Here. Mrs. Freinrich?
Here.
Dr. Hessen?
Here.
Mr. Robinson?
Here.
Mr. Sanders?
Here.
Mrs. San Martin?
Here.
Mrs. Schrader?
Here.
Dr. Sullivan?
Here.
And Mrs. Turner?
Here.
Madam President, all 9 board members are present with Mr. Desai online.
Thank you. This is your reminder to please silence your cell phones during our meeting. This is our first opportunity for public comment on agenda items. This public comment period is an opportunity to be heard by the board on agenda items only. Comments are to be directed to the entire board, not one individual board member, administrator, staff member, or the audience. Comments will be timed and limited to 3 minutes or less. Please note, board and staff members will not normally respond to comments or questions during the meeting. When you hear your name called, please come forward. You do not need to state your name or address before sharing your remarks. Alana Bordelin, Springettsbury Township. Hi, good evening.
Hi, good evening. I just wanted to say I was pleased to see this, the items on the agenda tonight. I've worked with McNeese recently and was quite pleased with each of the attorneys I met with on a regular basis. I think that's a strong choice. I think, like some of you, are incredibly frustrated as the township continues to move the goalposts constantly, it seems. 399 parking spaces for an elementary school is a bit obscene. So thank you. I do hope to see you take action and hire McNeese. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes our first opportunity for public comment. It's my duty as board president to report that the board met in executive session at 6 p.m. on December 18th, 2024, for the purpose of discussing legal matters as permitted by Section 707 of the Sunshine Act. No official action was taken. That brings us to the special agenda items special meeting agenda items listed on your agenda under the intermediate school project. Each of these 3 items will need a motion and a second prior to deliberation. So the first item is authorize the solicitor to file an appeal of the zoning officer's opinion regarding the number of parking spaces on behalf of the school district.
So move. Second.
We have a motion and a second. As stated from the executive session, the administration brought 3 proposals that you see on the agenda. We need to engage in discussion tonight to that end. Regarding this first item, the board needs to be aware that the appeal deadline, if we're choosing to appeal the zoning officer's opinion, is before our next board meeting, hence the need for tonight's special meeting. So is there discussion, or maybe I should just ask Mr. Jones if there are facts that you can share with us prior to our deliberation regarding this first item on our agenda?
Well, just to provide some clarity,
Okay.
the zoning, there was a request made for an interpretation of the number of parking spaces under the Springersbury Township zoning ordinance, and that was directed to the temporary zoning officer, Mr. John Luciani. John answered via a letter dated December 4th, 2024. It allows for an opinion or an appeal to be taken within 30 days to the zoning hearing board, and that is one of the matters that's being considered. The other item was the decision of the zoning hearing board that was issued December 6th. And again, that is a 30-day appeal period. I did share with the board the legal discussion and legal advice with regard to those items, and I don't believe there's anything else to say on those matters.
As I was not at the
Is there
executive
discussion?
session, yes, I have a question. As I was
Mr.
not at the
Sanders?
executive session, you're just appealing the interpretation of the zoning officer, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And can you talk through what that process is then, Attorney Jones, please, for the public's benefit?
That process is similar to what was done with the variance. It is an application to the zoning hearing board permitted under the MPC to request an appeal, consideration of an appeal to the zoning officer determination. There is some language within the zoning ordinance that I have a different opinion on, and I think there are some questions as to whether or not it was appropriately decided. If you look at, and there are also some additional information in letters, that in midsummer, there was a determination, not a determination, there was a statement from the zoning officer in an August 6th review letter that said only 183 parking spaces were needed. It wasn't until later that the number 399 parking spaces came up. So there is some question as to where that determination came from and when and why.
And just for clarification, the zoning hearing board is its own separate body. It is not the township per se that you're going in front of.
That's correct.
Thank you. Separate law firm as well.
Correct.
Thank you.
Is there other discussion? Board members? Steve?
Yeah, I would just say that to one degree or another, all 3 of these items are about clarification. And that the evolving professional opinion of the zoning officer over the last few months has left me uncertain about the rules to which any construction or renovation projects are going to be subject as it relates to parking. And I would say to those in the community who are opposed to the building project that they might and would like us to climb down from that position to spare a little concern that we have a position to climb down to. And if any substantial renovation to a building is going to subject the district to essentially impossible or infeasible parking requirements, then we don't have a climb down position from where we are now. And I take folks at their word who say, we're not advocating that you do nothing. We're not advocating that you don't do any renovations. We're not advocating that you don't, do any sort of transformation of the buildings, even in the relative to the footprints of the buildings that we have now. So I really need to know what the rules are that we're going to be subject to. And I'm, up to this point, I don't know. So I appreciate that we hopefully can get some clarification as to whatever it was that prompted the change in the zoning officer's opinion, as stated at various points over the summer. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Turner?
I just want to echo a bit of what Dr. Sullivan said. When I think about the different options that the board reviewed over the last few years, one of them was to keep both buildings and renovate, add on to them. And the way the current zoning officer is interpreting the parking for the building, it makes me question if we'd even be able to do that. If the parking that they would say we need is still too much, not feasible, more than necessary, whatever you want to call it. But that project might also be impossible because of the way he's interpreting that zoning. I think we are frustrated all around, but I think the back and forth, if we're able to get that presented to the zoning board from both the current zoning officer and the previous, and that timeline of how things have changed and shifted, we shouldn't, what do I want to say? The township needs to figure out which way they're going to interpret it, because it's not just us at the end of the day. This is going to impact others. It could impact others because we're not the only ones with parking lots. And the zoning doesn't specifically call out a school. And we have a lot of examples of our buildings and other schools in Springersbury that don't meet these requirements, these parking requirements. And I get that ordinances change, but 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders aren't driving. And parent night is once a year and can be spread out over more than one night. So I'm looking forward to authorizing this appeal. I will be a yes on this because we can't be treated differently just because we're a school. And I think this is the way to go. And I also want to point out that I do not blame Crabtree for where we're at right now with this, because they were put in this position by the township and what those zoning officers have said and changed. They started us down this path with an understanding that we needed so much parking. And we went down the path because they were told that. And for that to be changed is not Crabtree's fault.
Any other discussion? Mrs. San Martin?
Thank you. So I feel like this board has discussed at length the need of expansion of the current school based on the growing needs of the community, with all the new residencies being developed in our community. And the opinion originally from the zoning officer was 183 parking spaces, which seems reasonable. To ask for 399 spaces, which is more than any of our buildings, including the high school, which has the high school, Valley View, and the Ed Center. It has even, they're asking us to put even more parking spots that are in this campus right now. And there's obviously more space here than there is at East York. It just seems unreasonable, and it seems like they're giving us a unmanageable ask with this limitation of space that we have in that area. And I feel that we are being treated differently based on the construction that I see in their township. And I would definitely be a yes to this appeal.
Anyone else? I think you bring up a good point about a potential renovation. Those of you who mentioned that, it brings to my mind, what are we to do with that building? If we opt to build elsewhere, do we shutter that building because we can't truly renovate it because we don't have the space for 399 parking spaces? So some clarification, I think, is definitely in order. Is there further discussion?
Attorney Jones, can you opine on what a zoning officer or a township would be looking at? It's not a black and white decision on parking per se. It's dictated by the plan that's submitted, or can you talk about that a little bit, please?
I'd be happy to. Yes, it would be based on the plan submitted. The zoning officer determination would be made in looking at that plan. However, that being said, I generally will have zoning officers and engineers give a recommendation, and once you design to that, it doesn't change, because that's a bit unfair to the applicant who is designing to, based on your opinion, to then have to change that down the road. So I think on one hand, yes, it's based on every one of those, every iteration of the plan that comes in, but at the same time, usually the direction that's given is consistent, and it remains consistent. And once a question's answered and the plan is designed to, it moves down that path.
Anybody else? Can we do a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Desai,
Yes.
Mrs. Fryrick,
Yes.
Dr. Hessen,
Yes.
Mr. Robinson,
Yes.
Mr. Sanders,
Yes.
Mrs. San Martin,
Yes.
Mrs. Schrader,
Yes.
Dr. Sullivan,
Yes.
Mrs. Turner.
Yes.
Madam President, that motion passes 9-0.
Thank you. Moving on to the second item on the agenda, that is to approve cancellation of the Act 34 hearing scheduled for January 9th, 2025. Again, I need a motion and a second.
So move.
Second.
Thank you. So again, for clarification, in order to cancel this hearing, this decision needs to be made publicly. But until we get a determination of the number of parking places, it is premature to hold a hearing to close a building when we don't know exactly what we're doing as far as the construction of the intermediate school goes without the authorization of the township. We've been moving in good faith, working with the township, planned the hearing accordingly, and now we're at a bit of a standstill pending decisions regarding the number of parking places. So, any discussion from the board with regard to canceling our January 9th Act 34 hearing? Mrs. Fryrick?
Just a question. How much notice do we have to give when we, at some point, reschedule this Act 34 hearing? What is it? Is it
It is a 30-day notice
30-day
period. Yes.
notice? Okay. So there is a time factor involved that
Right.
till we get a determination and then move forward, we're looking at time. Thank you.
So just like we will determine the date of the hearing publicly, needs to be canceled publicly. So here we are.
And for what it's worth, in York, you have to actually have 33 days because there's a 3-day time frame to get an ad in the paper. So it's really 33 days.
Good to know. Any discussion, further discussion with regard to the hearing? Okay, hearing none, are there any votes to the contrary with regard to canceling our hearing? Hearing none, this could be considered a unanimous vote. Moving on to the third item on our agenda for our special meeting, that is to approve the engagement of special counsel services from the law firm McNeese Wallace for the purpose of supporting the district's ongoing construction projects.
So move.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. And this is very basically to investigate the treatment of the district with regard to the land development plan in the township. The rate for this special counsel can be found on your engagement letter, which all board members have at their places. Current hourly rate for the firm is $5.95. Rates of others who may work on the engagement is $3.05 and $2.35 as I read the letter. So engage in deliberation and discussion with regard to this item on the agenda. Mrs. Turner?
I do just have a question. Is this something that can be made public that we could attach to the agenda?
Yes.
Okay.
Mrs. Ryrick?
General question. I know that dealing with stock and leader, it's basically the superintendent and the president of the board and perhaps the business manager on some occasions. Is that the same type of behavior that'll be done with McNeese also?
Correct.
Okay. And will they be reporting at any times to us when if you feel there's significant information or share with us?
Yeah, as progress is made with they're looking into things and right to know requests and such, they would report back to the board in whatever form you see fit. They could probably attend, they could do something in writing, whatever you prefer.
Just a question for us to discuss. Is this something that we want to have Mrs. Kendig include when she's talking about the total cost of the project as another line item? I would say yes, it should be, but.
Probably, yeah.
I agree. I think it should be a line item.
Sure. Good point. Thank you for that. Any discussion from any board member? Steve?
Yeah, I would just say again, with an eye towards future construction and the fact that this may surface information that's useful in future proceedings of one type or another, I say we move forward.
Will Fidavia be in any of these discussions or working with McNeese? Or
I don't believe so. They shouldn't need to be. If they need any information, they could sift it through Dr. Krauser or our office.
Okay, just wondered. Thank you.
Mr. Evans?
Just have one question regarding the time frames of these cases. Are they usually long and protracted? I mean, a modern version of Jarndyce and Jarndyce, or do they go fairly quickly?
I think it depends on what the outcome of the investigation is and what the next steps are. I think the idea here is to make sure that the school district is being treated no less fairly or no more fairly than the average developer in Spring-Sperry Township. So I think that's what we're trying to establish and create a baseline, and then at some point decide whether or not there's sufficient information that you were not treated fairly, whether you want to move forward or not, and that would be decided by the board at a later point.
Attorney Jones, would they be engaging with the zoning board or the township in general, or both things simultaneously?
It would be the township zoning officer and the administration primarily. The zoning hearing board is what we call a quasi judicial body. So they really just sit and hear the case, whereas the township is the one kind of making decisions on how to move forward on the design process and how things move forward through that process.
Is there further discussion? Again, let's do a roll call vote then.
Mr. Desai?
Yes.
Mrs. Fryrick?
Yes.
Dr. Hessen? Mr. Robinson,
Yes.
Mr. Sanders,
Absolutely.
Mrs. San Martin,
Yes.
Mrs. Schrader,
Yes.
Dr. Sullivan,
Yes.
Mrs. Turner.
Yes.
The motion passes 9-0.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize our visitors this evening. Thanks everybody for attending. There are links for board members to upcoming events and board and committee meeting schedules attached. This brings us to our second opportunity for public comment. Same rules apply. This public comment period is an opportunity to be heard by the board on agenda items or other items which may reasonably come before the board. Comments are to be directed to the entire board, not one individual board member, administrator, staff member, or to the audience. Comments will be timed and limited to 3 minutes or less. Please note, board and staff members will not normally respond to comments or questions during our meeting. When you hear your name called, please come forward. You do not need to state your name or address before sharing your remarks. Mary Beliveau, Spring Goodsbury Township. Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening. Merry Christmas to everyone. I found it quite amusing that the discussion tonight was on parking spaces when there is no discussion about the feasibility of the $120 million project to begin with. The study was done in 2019, so those showed that you didn't have the money for that, and yet you voted for this board voted for a $120 million project, asking for, and we were asking for an accountability. We asked for an accountability for taxpayer money you have used to move forward with this project. Lawyers' fees, we see tonight $500 an hour for one lawyer for this situation, the architect, etc. We have received no accountability from this board for the money you're spending right now to move forward a project that is not feasible financially for this district. And it has nothing to do with the education of our children. So I ask you now to reconsider and stop the nonsense of using our taxpayer dollars to move forward a project, a $120 million project that is not feasible for the taxpayers. And I ask for your reconsideration of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mary Hawkins, Spring Garden Township. Hello, good evening.
At every single school board meeting, the leader of the meeting reads through the rules for public comment.
Perhaps speak into your microphone just a tad. Thank you.
At every single meeting, school board meeting, the leader of the meeting reads through the rules for public comment twice to ensure we are all aware of those rules. If the school board is going to impose rules for how we may comment, then they should apply to all members of the public who choose to comment. When the speaker's 3 minutes are up, Madam President takes the microphone and tells them time's up. At the December 16th board meeting, each speaker was stopped at the 3-minute time lapse, except one speaker who, coincidentally, was speaking in support of school board projects. No move was made to stop this speaker at 3 minutes. Even when members of the audience said something, she was still speaking with no interruption from the board. She kept going until the groundswell of audience voices nearly drowned her out, and yet not one thing was said by Madam President to explain this allowance. What message does this send us? What we suspect, the board is required to give us the floor, but anyone speaking in dissent of board actions is tuned out and endured until the 3-minute timer sounds. At that point, Madam President assertively tells the speaker to stop. In fact, I was in attendance several months ago when a board member shouted down a community member speaking, and even more appalling, the lawyer sitting with the board joined in and also shouted down the speaker. No one on the board or the board's attorney shouted down the speaker at the December 16th meeting who went well over the 3-minute limit. So if you're going to impose rules for speaking, you need to hold all speakers to the same rules, regardless of whether they're for or against board projects. It's disturbing that any show of dissent is met with contempt from the school board, even to the extent of attempting to block a fellow elected board member from obtaining information they should rightfully have access to. It's most definitely not in the purview of a board member to block information from their fellow board members or to the public. Perhaps it was unintended to let the speaker exceed 3 minutes. Regardless, I think the board owes an apology to other speakers from that meeting who were stopped at 3 minutes, which brings me to a previous request for the board to please demonstrate your desire for mutual understanding, respect, and trust by announcing to us a formal structure for how we may pose questions to the board and district and how we may get answers from you, since we can't get them here at this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Jenny James, Spring Garden Township. Hi, good evening, ma'am.
Good evening. Thank you. I've been thinking about one of the reasons that the board offered as a benefit to be gained by building the new school at East York. And I've also heard this reason mentioned several times at board meetings. This benefit is that building a new school to replace the two we already have is that we will have more spaces for collaboration among students, 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders. Now, maybe times have changed seriously, and I didn't know it, and primary grade students are more advanced than I remember, but somehow I doubt that. I looked up the word collaborate. To work with, it means to work with another or to cooperate. As I think back on all the opportunities in my life to collaborate with others, there was almost always the assumption that each person already had some fundamental or foundational knowledge from which to share and work, and the maturity to function together. Without having gained that basic knowledge, there would be nothing to share, nor much to contribute. This brings me back to thinking about primary education, a time to learn the basics, mostly an individual endeavor guided by a teacher or a mentor. Although I am certainly not an expert at curriculum design, I am definitely an observer and recipient of the learning outcomes of today's education. And sadly, there are some gaping holes that I doubt that an open space concept will fix. I believe collaborative learning is a good thing, but I also believe that it only occurs when the involved individuals are mature enough to participate effectively. I also believe that we should be modeling these lofty goals for our students in all that we all do. So I look at the very board that is providing oversight and direction to the education of our kiddos and don't see that much of that modeling is taking place, at least in the area of collaboration. Though the York Suburban website states that the board collaborates with the community in providing an excellent educational experience for the students of York Suburban District, the examples I observe here at those very meetings are anything but collaborative. You appear happy to hear from those who support everything you do and seem to dismiss or ignore any thoughts or opinions that might not agree with your plans. It appears most of you have spent your lives in the education field, and I applaud you for your passion and dedication. May I also remind you that most of us here in the community have worked out in the world in other professions using many different developed skills and perspectives, and bring a fresh and perhaps less biased view of what might be good for the kids. Thanks.
Thank you. That concludes our second opportunity for public comment. Anything from the board? Any board comments, recognitions, anything this evening? Okay, hearing none, we can stand adjourned. Thanks, everybody.